Welcome to the Hole. I am Rob Sprans.
And I'm Lori Levine.
So we have two guests on that have a lot more in common than you would think. We have Miles Taylor, the ex-chief of staff from Homeland Security, who we've had on a couple of times before, and he has a fantastic story and one of the bravest Americans that I can think of in quite some time, although it probably doesn't feel that way to you, Miles, sometimes, but you certainly are. And another longtime friend and guest, Tom Arnold, comedian, actor. He needs no introduction. But the reason why mentally I put you guys together is you have such common ground in your disdain for one specific individual and everything that kind of goes along with him, and that's the former President Donald Trump. Now, for those of you...
I was going to also say we both hate Arnold Schwarzenegger a lot. and people don't know that. Tom and I have been in this war against Schwarzenegger for a long time.
Yeah, well, let me tell you about Schwarzenegger. He used to, when I first started putting out my crazy Trump videos, he'd be like, you got to fucking calm down, man. You know, just talk about gerrymandering or talk about an issue. And then one day I saw that on the internet, he put out a crazy, messy-haired, anti-Trump video, and I was like, "You're doing my shtick, man." Like he had lost it, and people just generally at a certain point lose it. People that like Miles and I just have been more aware. And I want to say this about Miles: like we love our country. We love our country so much that we're willing to speak up because we have to. That's our job in a democracy. If you see something, you say something. And whatever the personal risk is, and there's always personal risk from bad guys. So I appreciate what Miles has done, and he looks good doing it.
Well, and let me clarify a couple things for the record. One, I'm in a little tiny airport on this book tour, so if you hear baggage claim announcements, and especially if you hear your bag called, please go get your bag. But second, we love Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm glad he's been out there vocal on these issues, and if Trump wins re-election, Arnold's going to be the get to the chopper, and Tom and I are going to run into the chopper with him and flee the country. But also, it's hard for people like Tom Arnold in the position that they're in the industry that they're in to go speak up on these issues. I mean, your agents on day one out in that business tell you, stay the hell away from politics. And so I continue to be so impressed by and admiring of people who are willing to put their careers on the line to go have these conversations. Tom's certainly one. So a big fan, but I'm sure we'll find a way here to create just total and complete dissent between the two of us in the course of this podcast. We'll be beating each other up in these squares.
Things that when we first started this, at least my experience, my agents at Gersh quit because they were getting so many death threats. They're like, what? And I go, well, that goes along with it. When you call out these terrible people, they're like, yeah, we don't want to be a part of it. But you do know that going in, and I knew with people in my business really supported Trump because they made money with him, whether it be Mark Burnett or whoever. And then there were some people that were ambivalent. And I just think that after this amount of time, people are like, okay, we get it. He's a terrible human. But I think it took people, there's some people that don't get it. Like Arnold had me over to his house and we had a charity event we did, and he made sure to invite Kevin McCarthy. And there's a picture you see that he tweeted. I thought it was so hilarious. This is 2019 of putting me and Kevin together and let you guys. And McCarthy said, "Why do you hate Trump?" And I said, "Why don't you hate Trump? That's the real question."
Right. Well, I think Miles can kind of blow that apart as well. But let's just real quick. The book is called Blowback. It is out now. And a lot of that, and Kevin McCarthy is actually one of the people that you mentioned at one point, as much as he says that publicly, Miles, that's not really what he thinks, correct?
No, and that's what kills me. And, I think, Tom, you all feel the same way, is we've seen this story over and over of these people who will meet with us in private and tell you one thing, and they won't own up to it in public. And Kevin was he was majority leader in the House when I was still working in the House, and we would have these meetings in 2015 during Trump's rise in 2016 where Kevin said he was a buffoon and he couldn't tell the difference between a donkey and a Republican because he'd flipped parties. And, he and Paul Ryan and the others all thought Trump was a danger to the party. No one thought he was going to be a danger to the country because they didn't think he could win. But they thought, well, he's going to ruin our brand in the meantime. And now they continue to just cater to him and cater to him. And that's what's so disconcerting to me is seeing them continue to support the ex-president despite privately their disdain for him.
Yeah. Well, you see a lot of, and nothing gives me greater joy than when the people that won't say anything lose everything. Like they know better. And there is a lot of people, including my ex-wife, Rosette, who was such a different person when she never liked Trump. She was liberal, the most liberal person I'd ever met when we met. But something has happened, and she's incapable of saying anything negative about Donald Trump. And even when our mutual friend, Rosie O'Donnell, he called her a big fat pig, she got asked about it. She said, well, he never called me a big fat pig. And I promise you he called her a big fat pig too. But they've got this crazy thing where, they got to be all on the one side or, man, it's a heck of a thing.
Well, and Tom, I'll add, and this is very ironic coming from me, but I actually, in the course of writing this, came to the conclusion that I think the biggest threat to our democracy is anonymity. And again, ironic coming from me that my initial criticisms against Trump were anonymous. And what I realized in the course of my unmasking is that by putting your name out there, you make it easier for the next person to do it. You lower the costs. And right now, that's the big problem. We still have so many people that are legitimizing this authoritarian streak in our political system, even though privately they know it's wrong. And that collective anonymity is really a really big threat to our democracy. And I would say to those people, and I have said to some of those people, take it from me. It will be the biggest weight off your shoulders in your life to come out and just speak the truth about this. And, ironically, some of the people that I interviewed for this book were Republicans who had blasted me for anonymously criticizing the president, and who, when I interviewed them for this book, said, could you please not attribute the quotes to me? And I said, oh, so you want to be anonymous in my book, but you think it's cowardly to anonymously criticize a president. That's just the hypocrisy. It blows my mind.
Well, was that Lindsey Graham?
Let me say real quick. The first women that came forward about Harvey Weinstein, let me tell you something, man. They put great personal risks because people in their lives are like, please don't even, okay, this terrible thing happened. Don't talk about it. You'll never work again. You'll be attacked. You'll be slandered. You'll have and they came forward. And if not for the first ones, there wouldn't have been all the other ones. And they took all the slings and arrows, whether it be any kind of situation where a terrible person is involved. There people will tell you, don't do it. Your family will tell you, don't do it. It happens with the Catholic Church or whatever. But the people that come forward, I appreciate that the most. And also for their soul, it's a heck of a thing to do, but it's not, we get the idea that, oh, this can't be done. All the fears about worst case scenario. And I think in your case, it's the best case scenario. And then it just makes the other people that don't do it look shameful.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because if you look at, there's a lot of different areas, and there's kind of a whistleblower theme here. And Miles also has a podcast coming out, which is actually out now, called Whistleblowers, where he talks to different people who are in this position. But it's such a good point, Tom, because if you think about it, there is that cavern when you first do it, I'm sure, where you feel alienated. Look at Leah Remini with Scientology and the guts it took to do that. Yeah. Look at Harvey Weinstein. Look at someone like Mira Sorvino, who had the courage to come out, and Uma Thurman to say those things at the time, to be those first ones. Look at what Miles went through. Miles did not have an easy go for a long time. Like Miles, went into, he talks about it in the book. Like, he was near death at one point and had to come back from it. But all of a sudden, now in retrospect, these people all seem like heroes. And, no one's going to seem like a hero to 100% of the people, especially in the topic of government, because we're so divided right now. People refuse to budge, even in the face of logic.
Yeah, but
It was.
Miles
Oh, go
took
ahead,
it.
Tom.
Miles took it from both sides because obviously the Trump side was like, "Oh, this guy is a traitor, whatever." But also the liberals are like, "Why isn't he? If he has this information, man, why he should be trying to save the country. He should put his name and his face and everything on it right now." And so he had to deal with all of that, and I find peace in the fact that he did what he could do. It made everything even more effective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and one of the things I appreciate about people like Tom is there was a period of time where you had the political left saying, we desperately need people to break from the Republican tribe, call this man out, and expose who he really is. And then you had a lot of those people come forward around the same time I did. And then parts of the left said, shame on you for not coming forward sooner. And it was like, well, shit.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't this what you wanted? And I actually worried because I thought it made it harder for other people to come forward because they were scared about exactly that, getting attacked from the right, which they knew would happen, but that they wouldn't find safe harbor in the left saying, we've got your back. Yes, you should speak out. And I think that's a very tough thing we're still dealing with. And I'll give you an example. Stephanie Grisham is one of those people I spoke to for this iHeartMedia podcast. And I didn't have a lot of love for Stephanie. In fact, when I came out against Trump, she went on TV network after TV network to say, this guy's a coward and he's a liar. And, she just blasted me and made things very hard for my family. I mean, yeah, we did receive death threats. We did go into protective custody because things like what Stephanie Grisham was saying. But I'll tell you what, the week that she came out and quit that administration in protest after January 6th, and it was at the very end, and started to speak out against him, I was among the first to reach out and say, thank you for what you did. Let's bury the hatchet. And that's not, me, boasting my own credentials. That's what we need people to do in mass is to say, not retribution, that it's possible to, come back from that rehabilitation is possible. And we should encourage people to do that because those are the folks we need to beat it in another go around. And now, Stephanie, I actually consider her a friend. And, we spoke to her for this podcast. And she was, when you listen to this episode, and I'm not trying to sell the podcast, it's the last episode of the podcast. It is one of the most gritty, emotional podcast episodes I've ever heard because she walks through what's happened in her life since then, since speaking out against Trump. And she could have gone and made millions working in the Republican Party and still work for him or go work for some corporation on the political right. And instead, she's living in a little tiny town called Plainville, Kansas, on a little tiny farm in the absolute political wilderness. And you know what? She has no regrets. And that was the biggest takeaway for me of talking to all these other whistleblowers. People lost homes and jobs and marriages and their lives were blown up. And then at the end of telling their stories, we would say, but do you regret doing it? Not a single person in this whole series we spoke to said, I regret it. Every single one to a person said, I would do it again. And that was so inspiring to me because a lot of the folks who speak out, I'm sure, Tom, you felt this way in speaking out. Yeah. It could feel very lonely and isolated.
Yeah. And I see it with Stephanie. I could see the trauma on her face. I'm great. I'm happy that she's back in Kansas with her animals. I mean, I'm grateful that she spoke out like she did. People on my side, Liz Cheney, who could be, nobody's braver and more eloquent. Like it's not just that she was against Trump; it's the way that she spoke. And was just relentless. Mm-hmm. And people would go, yeah, but what about her dad? And shut the fuck up. What about her dad? What about right now? What about she's really giving it up? She's like, it's in. Her and Kissinger, but especially her, it's in. She had this thing, and people get used to this being a congressperson and the stuff and this and that. And she's like, oh no, I'm going to do this thing. I'm all in. And I have way more respect for people that do that instead of people that are kind of both sidesing stuff. But
Mhm.
she had a line, and she was firm about it, and she was firm about with Kevin McCarthy. She was firm about with these other, and it really showed what the Republican Party has become. That they turned on her for the truth and for. So I was in Wyoming at an autograph thing last week. I was like, "Where does Liz Cheney live? I want to go give her a hug. I'll give her dad a
We
hug."
know I was at a thing, Tom, about a year ago with her, and pulled her aside afterwards, and we were talking about the threats, and she knows my family's dealt with it, and her family's dealt with it, and she said something that was really striking to me. She said, in my family, in the Cheney family, having a security detail, look, it used to be a mark of prestige in Washington. If you went around town in armored vehicles and had guards, that meant you were important. She said, now it's not a mark of prestige. Now for my family, it's a mark of the fact that we are getting death threats when we're back home in our own state. It's a mark of fear and danger in this political moment we're in. And that really summed it up for me, because I remember being a young guy coming into Washington and thinking, yeah, anyone with a security guard, it's not really in danger, but they're an important person. But we've got public officials who are literally fearing for their lives to take votes. And I was so grateful for Liz for saying that publicly, that she said, I've got colleagues that won't vote a certain way because they're scared they'll go home and their families' lives will be in danger. And that's the honesty that we needed. When I spoke to Adam Kinzinger for this book, he said something similar, but he took it another step further. And you guys might remember this joke, and I'll get to it in a second. But I said, Adam, why are your current colleagues not doing more? They all say this stuff to us in private. They don't say it in public. And I said, is it the fear of attack, like Liz and you and the death threats we've all been getting? And he said, no, it's something worse than that. They are more afraid to get kicked out of the tribe than they are for their own families to be attacked. The tribalism is so intense, they're more afraid of that. And it made me think of this Jerry Seinfeld joke. Is 30 years ago, he used to start sets and say, there's a poll that came out of Americans' biggest fears, and their number one fear is public speaking, and their number two fear is death. So your average American would rather be in the coffin than delivering the eulogy. And that's what's happening with the Republican Party today, is they would rather be in the coffin than speaking out in this moment. And that's what's really scary to me, is we've got to lower that price of dissent to make it easier to dissent without that fear.
Yeah, and there are names in the book now that kind of make me think of people who, I don't know, you would think that would have had the sense to speak out a little bit more back then. One of them, talk about being in a catch-22, was John Kelly. Now, you talk about John Kelly a lot in the book, and most of the stories are clearly John Kelly was reacting exactly how we thought he was. You were on the inside, we were not. It looked like every time Trump opened his mouth, John Kelly was in pain. It really did. Like you could see.
There's so many memes.
So many of them. But there we all felt, okay, thank God he's there, because he will stop him from doing X, Y, Z. But it seemed like no one really could really stop him from anything, or they would try to stop him and he just wouldn't care. Like, it even seemed like as much weight as people, and this is what I'm getting from the book too, as much as weight as people gave to Jared, it seemed like Jared at some times would tell him that he was going off the rails, and he would just ignore him anyway.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, group number 4 is boarding now. Group number 4, please make sure to get to your plane.
I think that's my group.
yeah. Sorry, Lori. I'll see you later.
I love
it's very true. I obviously hold Kelly in very high regard, because Kelly knew from the start that he was jumping on a grenade. And I remember, and I described this moment in the book of when we're in the Oval Office and Kelly's getting sworn in, and it was like a good man jumping on a grenade thrown by a bad one. And Trump was grinning because he knew, he thought he was going to put Kelly under his thumb. Here was the guy that was opposing him the most inside the administration, a man he knew had a conscience. and he felt like now I've got him right here down the hall, and I'm going to keep a check on him. And since that time, Kelly's continued to speak out more and more. He has, recently, he really chooses his moments, and I think they're very impactful when he chooses them. But you mentioned someone that I'm really glad you did, which was Jared Kushner, because I get a lot of pressure to go dump on all of these people, and they're complicated figures. And I've got no deep love for Jared and Ivanka. But it's true that there were moments where Jared would actually stand up pretty assertively against his father-in-law to stop some really crazy things from happening. I'll tell you, when the family separation debacle was underway and we could not get Trump and Stephen Miller to walk off of it, it was Jared and Ivanka that helped get to him and reverse that egregious, catastrophic policy. So there were moments where people you assume are just total loyalists did stand up and do the right thing. Unfortunately, what we realized was that our thesis that an axis of adults could keep Trump in check, was totally wrong. And I was probably one of the biggest boosters of this thesis out there. I mean, when I first put my op-ed out there, I said, rest assured, America, the president's cabinet thinks he's a lunatic and he's a danger to the country, but they're keeping him in check. And I was totally wrong. Why? Because what did the president do? He systematically identified and fired those people. And my point later on was that we can't rely on unelected bureaucrats to protect the country against a wayward chief executive. We, the voters, are responsible for firing or rehiring that person. And I'm glad they fired him in 2020, but I do think there is significant risk of him returning in 2024 or a like-minded copycat. And certainly the polls show it. And the odds markets show it.
Well, General Kelly, here's a guy that's been all about service to his country his whole life. I mean, he's done it. I could see why a guy like that would go, okay, I'm needed here. I'm going to get it. I'm going to try to get things to ship straight, with everything I know and everything I do. I mean, nobody could have prepared for how disgusting Trump was. But I get why somebody would say, as a service to my country. And I promise, Miles, there are things that whether it be Jared or General Kelly or whoever the other folks were, that stopped Trump from doing worse things. Not that at the end, like he whittled it down so he could have free reign on everything at the end. And Mark Meadows is like, let him do it. But to get to that point at the end where he now is trying everything. Good people, some slowed him down a little bit, enough. And I always worried about your boss over there. What's her last name? Nielsen?
Kirstjen Nielsen, yeah.
Yes, her face, I mean, I'm just judging from watching how uncomfortable she was around Trump. And,
Tom, there was something really impacted me, and I mentioned this in the text, and which is Bret Stephens wrote this op-ed a few months after I'd written this anonymous missive, and he said, "Dear Trump," or "Dear Anonymous inside the Trump administration," and it was after Trump had decided to fire Mattis and fire Kelly, and he's firing all these people. And Bret Stephens writes in the Times, "You persuaded yourselves that an axis of adults could do this, but now you must realize that your thesis was wrong. And the longer you stay, the greater risk you run of becoming an enabler and a sycophant." And Bret was completely right. And I actually had the good fortune a couple of months ago to chat with him for the first time about that. And I said, look, it was a wake-up call for me. It was like on the eve of Christmas that I saw this. And I was like, he's right. I mean, there was a point at which that saying no was no longer enough. And Kirstjen Nielsen experienced that very viscerally. I mean, people have a public perception of her as one of Trump's Gestapo, and that she went out there and, family separation and that sort of thing. And love her or hate her, I will be honest with you, that probably the two people that fought most often with Donald Trump in private were John Kelly and Kirstjen Nielsen, as they were constantly in the Oval Office with him saying, you can't do this, this is illegal, this is wrong. And there were a couple circumstances where, she ended up being the fall girl for the administration. Was a record perfect? No. But that also validates Bret's point is the longer you stay past that point where he stops accepting when you say no and starts rejecting your better advice, then you do become a sycophant. Then you do become an enabler, and that's the time you have to go and you have to oppose from the outside. And people made that different choice. I mean, I always think of the administration it was a moral choose your own adventure of, do I go in or do I not? Do I try to keep a check on the inside? Do I not? At what point do I quit? At what point do I bring out the resignation letter? Do I go out publicly? And people made very different moral choices. But I think it's abundantly clear now what we will get if we make this civic mistake again. And what we will get is, and I mean this without hyperbole, we will get the total destruction of our democracy. And don't believe me, believe the people I talked to in this book. Sue Gordon, who was the number 2 of the intelligence community under Trump, said something to me as I was writing this. She said, I project with low confidence that America reaches its 300th birthday in any recognizable form. Well, America will turn 300 in this century, and her worry is that we would elect another Trump and not reach that birthday. So I do think democracy really still is on the line.
I'm worried about our 250th birthday. The Centennial, it's called, the 250, because I'm old enough. I was there for the 200th. And in 1976.
Tom, you're almost 250, aren't you? Aren't you? You're probably you're getting close to that.
My kids are 10 and 7. I'm a single dad. And I know you guys, in 3 years, when they have that big 250 birthday, I said, when I was 16, they had the 200, and it was the greatest experience of my life because all the adults in our neighborhood just got wasted. All the 16-year-olds got wasted. They had an excuse to celebrate America. It was crazy. So 250, I want to make it to 250. And I honestly think if Trump gets reelected, which the odds are, if you're an odds person, but it's possible. The fact that it's possible means we need to do everything we can and learn from our mistakes. And so, again, I appreciate these guys having us on, Miles. I appreciate you, too. And I love Lori.
Well, I mean, on the point of odds, and I've been saying this a lot the past couple of days, the really jarring thing is that in 2016, on the eve of Trump winning the presidency, the odds makers in Vegas had him at a 9% chance of winning. The odds markets, as we speak, have him hovering between 27% and 37% likelihood of being the next president of the United States. He has 3 times the odds as he did in 2016. Now, look, those prognosticators don't have some magic ball, but why it's important to look at the odds markets is they are a reflection of popular sentiment. And so that tells you that Americans think there's a really good chance, and that means a good number of them think that they would vote for him a second time around. That's really the worry. We've got a blinking red light here. Although I would be curious to ask you guys, and I'm going to interview the interviewers, is what gives you optimism in this moment? Because I think everything's so doom and gloom. Tom does an amazing job of this, of painting a picture of what's scary about the moment we're in, but also bringing levity to it and inspiring people and not just having it be doom and gloom. I'm curious what gives you guys optimism about how we get out of this mess.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura. You go first.
I don't know what gives me. I think what happened in Kansas with women's right to choose, to see a very Republican state vote with such a majority to keep that law in place. And I think the GOP was shocked that happened. Things like that. And unfortunately, taking away a woman's right to choose, I feel, gets more people out to the polls. Mm-hmm. It's sad that it's something, taking away rights, going back in history, that's hopefully going to make more young people go out and vote. I think it's just the sadness is what's giving me optimism. The less rights we have.
Yeah. That's great. Well said. And what she said about the younger generation, that's one thing that definitely I think gives me a little optimism, because first time around there are 4 years worth of people who weren't eligible to vote who now are, and I do know most of that MAGA demographic does skew older. Although, look, parents bring up their children the same way sometimes, so it's not across the board. But, the other part of it is, too, as much as as much as that's all we hear, I do always tend to think that they are the louder of the two for a lot of different reasons. So I do think that they're still the minority. They're just the louder of the minority. And again, I may be completely wrong here, but prime example. Remember the whole ridiculous argument they were making about the lawn signs? There's no way Joe Biden could have won because all I see is Trump lawn signs. I don't see Joe Biden lawn signs.
Yeah.
But the reality is, no one's going to put it on there because these fucking maniacs will know you're identifying who you are, and the other way around, no one's gonna bat an eye at it. But I don't think the lawn sign argument really stood up because at the end of the day, I think the people who are a little more sane are the silent majority, and I think that's why when the election was over, that's what came to be the cream rose to the top, whatever way you want to put it. I just think that the extreme right, and I'm not going to put all the right because Miles, you're a Republican, so it's not like I don't know if you still are, well, um, but there are plenty, but there are plenty of Republicans who don't see that way. So my hope is that what's going to happen is just what happened last time. Is they're not the loudest of the group, but they have the most, and they speak when it matters. They'll go to the polls, just like Laurie mentioned. They'll go to the polls and they'll vote when it matters most. Because you don't see me. I used to be like this, but you don't see me tweeting every day about Trump anymore. I used to. It exhausts me over time. It exhausts me to watch cable news every night and go to bed annoyed because that's how it's staged. They'll have Miles on with someone they know completely disagrees with Miles so that they can fight with each other. In this case, I wanted you guys on because you have common ground and you can discuss it in your own different way. So that's what I'm most hopeful for.
Rob,
Tom, what gives you optimism?
Yeah, here's the optimism. This is what I got to do in my life. I'm also a sober guy who has to take life one day at a time. There you go. But what I do is I look back and say, it is overwhelming. It is sometimes. But you go, where are we? Oh yeah, Joe Biden won by 7 million votes in 2020. That happened. Trump is not sitting in the White House right now. In fact, a lot of great things happened. And when people criticize Joe Biden, he's the only person that could have won. Him and Kamala Harris, that team is the only team that could have taken down Trump and those bad guys. That's just a fact. You can look at the. So I love that, and maybe he doesn't have the signs or have the flags or, do this crazy stuff Trump does, but he is solid, man. Joe Biden is solid, and he's underrated, and he's done a lot of fantastic stuff. So I'm grateful that Trump is out there. I'm grateful that more people have spoken out, and that people like Miles have detailed things. I mean, but I've also seen a lot of people, during the hearings, January 6th hearings, which I thought were amazing, where they slowly, methodically, and you hear these young women come up, risk everything, and say, well, this is what happened. And a lot of times it is the younger people like Miles and like the young women that spoke up. And, because a lot of times people that have the number one jobs, they're like, whether it be Mike Pompeo, whether it be whatever they say in private, in public, they're like, yeah, I cannot do that. But these other people who literally will lose everything, they will. So that's inspiring to me. I agree with Lori about Kansas. I think Iowa just passed a the stupid 6-week thing, and I just have a feeling that's going to end up turning on all those people because when you have
in the recent Supreme Court rulings,
yeah, and when you have men who are not doctors legislating. Well, because it is the ultimate thing they want. It is sort of this Christian nationalism to have their schools with their information and to control women because women are just out of control, man. They are out of control. They're out there working and doing stuff, and they need to be sitting at home following orders. And our kids need to not be exposed to the real world. And they pick the most vulnerable group of people, the trans people. They're like, that's
Yeah.
going to be. We don't like drag queens because we had a protest at Dodger Stadium 2 weeks ago. It's crazy because there's a gay comedy troupe that dresses like nuns, and they raise money for charity, and they're very funny. And they were outraged. People were outraged, and they had 2,000 Catholics blocking the entrance with signs that say "Protect the children," with no irony that the Catholic Church and the priests and the cover-ups and the institutional stuff. They're about this one gay comedy team, and that's what they do. And I'd be happy if a person dressed up as their character, and it came down and read to my kids, because it's so hard to keep kids' attention. My kids are first and third grade. I've read to them. I go down to the school. I'm not a parent that's like complaining about the school. And if you aren't involved with the school, then shut the hell up. If it's just this protest, you better be down there doing everything you can. But the drag queens reading to kids, again, to keep kids' attention, whatever it takes. Sometimes you gotta, I get that and I appreciate that. And to have, and it's this thing with the Proud Boys and Trump and all the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers, and to go, okay, I'm gonna be with those guys, and we're gonna bring our guns to a library in front of kids and yell obscenities, because we're the better parent. It's crazy.
I have to hold Tom accountable here, because we talk about the QAnon movement, and I actually think this really started in 1996. If you go back in time, this guy Tom Arnold did a movie about a man who's got a conspiracy theory about the government secretly controlling society, and it was called The Stupids. I think that's where the QAnon movement started, is when Tom was in The Stupids, and he's to blame for this big conspiracy theory movement in our culture.
It does, that movie, I watched it with my kids recently, and it is, it's based on children's books, but that I first think the government is stealing my trash, because I put the trash can out, and in the morning, the trash is gone. And I go to I work at the post office, and everything adds up. And it's lighthearted, but it does track right along with these Trump supporters. Like, again,
there are some really interesting parallels. There actually is. Someone needs to write a dissertation on that.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
I go.
I mean, what?
A letter says "Return to sender," and I go down to David Cronenberg, the great director, plays my boss at the post office. I'm like, who is this sender? I've got to look at. Then I go looking for sender, who's returning all the. It's crazy, but it does make sense now, unfortunately.
Well, one thing I want to foot stomp that you were pointing to, Tom, was just how these movements they've become militant, and that's really the concern. And I always say no one has to play the violin for me, but the hate and the vitriol got so extreme in my case. I felt like I needed to talk about it in Blowback very honestly. And one of the things was, the pressure from all of this and the hate led me to start drinking in extraordinary excess and abusing prescription pills. And it was something that Hannah, my now wife, and I talked a lot about in the lead up, is whether I wanted to go there. But it got to the point that, I was a full blown alcoholic. I was suicidal. I'm proud to say, 18 months sober at this point, and, had some great help getting through all of that. But this is what it does to people. Again, no one has to have sympathy. I am lucky to have an incredible support network. But the political environment today, the crowdsourced hate, is killing people. And it's discouraging good people from going into public service because they just don't want to experience this. And so, in kindergarten, when your teacher says, everybody can change the world, and you think, yeah, I can't. Well, we're in a moment now where everyone is responsible for our public discourse. All of us are responsible for either making it easier for people to go serve and supporting good people, or harder by engaging in these crowdsourced attacks. And it's something that we've got to be really cognizant of. And so I do think everyone plays a role in that, in lowering the temperature for us in this country.
Well, Miles, I'm proud of you for acknowledging that. I'm proud of you for getting the help because by you just talking about it for a moment, somebody out there is going to go, "Oh yeah, I've got that situation," because that's the whole point of us being of service, or whatever. And you look at Miles and you go, "Wait, he was on drugs and that." You look at me and go, "Yeah, he was," but Miles it gets all of us, and you just don't know. It's insidious. It wants to kill us. It still wants to kill us, the disease. We still have to be on top of it. But I'm grateful that your wife and you and you have a group of like-minded people that makes life a lot easier.
Well, and I don't want to overextend the analogy here, but you know, when I was grappling with suicidal ideation, I'd only gotten to that place because Gate 6. Whoever's going to Gate 6, please get to Gate 6. It's time for boarding at Gate 6. When I was at that point, it was because I had let each of my guardrails that should have protected me from getting there corrode one by one by one, and was in denial. I mean, the thing you learn, and I'm a novice saying this in sobriety world, but you learn that you tell yourself all of these lies. You become the most incredible liar in covering up the fact that you have a problem. It's really similar with our democracy right now. I would say at the moment, America is flirting with suicidal ideation because somehow we're convincing ourselves that this guy might actually be worthy of a second term in office. There's millions of Americans that think maybe we should put him in office again, and that's because we've slowly let these democratic guardrails corrode, and that's what really worries me. Although one thing that I'm laughing about, Tom, now that I forgot that you're a prominent sober person, and you've inspired a lot of other people to get sober. And one of the tropes is I'm sitting here pounding a Diet Coke. And my warning to anyone is, if you get sober, this is what you'll become addicted to.
And they're like, you should drink those. Let me just deal with the top 10 things I shouldn't do. And I'll work on the Diet Coke Zero or whatever. And Miles, also, religion, whatever I'm Jewish, but I'm not, but whatever people want to do, and bad people have co-opted this, and you see that it's come into roost with people like the Falwells, who I feel grateful to be a part of exposing their hypocrisy, and then, now the Southern Baptist Convention. But I do worry, and people can be any kind of religion they want, but I do worry about the people that believe in the rapture, which, if you know this story, I know Michael Cohen and I are on tape talking about it because he's doing it too.
Is it 22,000? What is the number?
What's that?
How many people? Is it? 22,000?
They talk about they love Israel, love Jews, but they love us, and then they incinerate us. They don't talk about that part in the rapture. And if you believe that rapture, if you believe Trump is somehow connected to I think it's Jesus that comes or whatever, then you don't care as much about. You're like, okay, this life is, but soon. So let's go all in on the worst thing. Let's hurry this rapture up. And I know Mike Pompeo is one of those guys. I'm like, he should not be in charge of anything if he thinks that it's going to be better soon when everybody's incinerated except him and his buddies. However many, So I think, and I believe, this is what I believe. My kids say, well, what's heaven? I go, this is probably heaven right now. This is the heaven right today, what we're living today. There's no guarantees of anything else. And, when I was young, I was terrified because super religious people told me a lot about hell. If you do this, you're going to burn in hell and stuff. And that's another thing young people don't want. They don't want any part of that. So I think that people have tried to use that and scare people. That's all a lot of this stuff is we want to scare you. They are after us because we're the chosen ones. And I do think that is turning the corner too. And we'll see. Knock on wood.
Well,
wait, I have to ask Miles, because it's so important in the book. It's the scariest story is how close you guys thought we were to going to war, a nuclear war with North Korea.
Totally. And actually there's no way she wants me to put her on. This is the love of my life, Hannah. She's here at the airport.
Hey,
Anna says,
I love you.
well, Hannah actually knows this. I mean, I always say we found love in a hopeless place. We actually met in the national security community together, and we were friends back then, and then hadn't seen each other in a long time, and reconnected on the back end of all of this, me going against Trump craziness. And so I was in a previous relationship that completely fell apart amidst that period, and it was in the lowest spot. And then, in any event, met the love of my life, and she saved my life. But I will say this about that period. This is how serious it is. And this story, is recounted in the book. For the first time in the history of the Department of Homeland Security, we held meetings during the Trump administration of every senior official to plan for the possibility of an actual nuclear war. And I was surprised that DHS gave me approval to say this, because you have to put your book through the pre-publication review process so it doesn't contain classified information. We held these incredibly sensitive meetings because we were worried that Trump was going to lead us into an accidental war with North Korea. So worried that we held planning meetings, which had never happened in the department's history. Like, yes, DHS does exercises to prepare for the possibility of nuclear scenarios. Exercises happen all the time. But this was the first time ever the department had to assemble all of its leaders and say, okay, no shit. It's possible this could happen. What are we going to do? And I'm telling you, the answers as I walked out of that room were terrifying. We were so woefully underprepared for that type of conflict that the president was zombie walking us into, that, we're talking millions of American lives that were at risk. That's how serious it was. And if he gets reelected again, I think we could be in situations like that. I mean, Fiona Hill, who was one of Trump's top advisors on the National Security Council, I spoke to Fiona for this book, and she said, look, if he wins a second term, they're going to stack the intelligence community with partisan loyalists who are going to manipulate information, and America will accidentally stumble into wars. That was her quote. And I think that's not hyperbole. I really think that's how serious this is. And we were closer to the brink than people realize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've never seen in my lifetime, I never thought I'd see so many people defend a country for invading a neighbor. So Russia comes in, what they do to Ukraine, they invade it. You would think the same people who are so rattling their sabers about Iraq invading Kuwait, the same people are all defending Putin now because of the misinformation, because he stood there and said he's a good guy, and because he validated North Korea. As when Joe Biden won, he started shooting off missiles again to try to get our attention. You know what we did? We did what we were supposed to do. We just ignored it. We just ignored him publicly. I'm sure privately that doesn't happen, but he went there and shook the guy's hand and validated him. That was all he wanted, was to be validated.
Well, also, they criticized Obama when Crimea happened.
Right.
People that said he is weak, he is whatever, that would never happen if we were in there. And then it happens in this, then they're like, well, there's a couple Nazis in the Ukrainian army. And
Right,
so they're all not, but the sucking up to Putin. I mean, Miles would speak of this. That should have. There's always been with Trump. There's deal breakers. I was sort of friendly with him until 2011 when he did the birther stuff, and I called up Mark Burnett. I go, you got to tell. This is outrageous. I said, if the first Jewish president, if Donald Trump demanded to see his birth certificate, every rabbi in the country would speak up. He'd never be on TV again. He would certainly not be in the White House. So right. What are you going to do about it? And then the John McCain stuff in Iowa. How crazy that John McCain, who, whatever your politics, this guy lived in a 3-foot cage for 5.5 years, defending this country, and the guys with him. And Trump, I mean, the fact that they didn't all just go running when he talked like that, there's been so many signs that lead to him and John, Kim Il, sending each other love letters or whatever. Everything led to that moment. And the next term would be way worse.
Well, and not only that, it's not only that they allowed him to say those things, it radicalized the base. And so, Rob, this is a great point to bring up, is it's not just that they looked the other way as he showered Putin with love. It's that they now share those views. And you've got a Republican Party that's pro-Putin, effectively. I mean, one of America's biggest adversaries. And I think that's a really a very alarming thing. And, it just goes and shows how powerful the tribalism is in our politics
And,
today, that you could persuade those Republicans who hated Putin to love Putin.
yeah. Well, here's the thing, too. And this happens in America, I think, once a generation, where someone will come along like Trump. And I could see it in Iowa when we first started coming to Iowa. And people that were like, wait a minute. Oh, he is like us, except worse. Now we can be the worst of ourselves. And white people, especially poor white people, they do this every generation. They go, oh, wait a minute, that's our guy. He's going to defend the white race. He's going to defend it. He's going to say the things we want to say. And what ends up happening is that person, that figurehead, ends up getting kicked out. And all the white supporters, they don't move up. And you see people of color every generation moving up. And this mass of white people stay in the same place because they bought the bullshit. They're like, yeah, he's going to be like us. And they bought the bullshit, and then they stayed the same. And that's, you see it in American history, especially the last 150 years. It happened in the South for a long time. It happened, and then they kind of stay the same because the rich white people do fantastic. They do amazing. But that group of working class white people, they're like, and then later they go, shit, maybe I was, but then they'll do it again in the next.
They don't even go shit. That is, to me, the biggest of all of the cons that the parties ever pulled, was that they were for the low class working man. That's the biggest con that the parties ever pulled, and that's not just now. That's for decades. Yeah. That's for decades, and it hasn't changed. It just sowed its roots. I remember I mentioned earlier parents bringing up their children in a certain way. It's just that for some reason, the irony is that the Republican Party, that's the last people that they're for. And the working white class are just so against the Democratic Party because, again, we'll go back to the media just feeding them stuff, and it's on both sides. It's not just one side, which is why I stopped watching all of that stuff, because you formulate better opinions when you can read factual articles and move on rather than watch people fight, because you're not only choosing, like, if I see you on arguing with someone from the far right and I don't like the guy from the far right, I side with your opinion, even if I don't necessarily agree with it as much as the guy I hate more. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's become.
Well, honestly, I think that's why long form is having a renaissance. I mean, I think that's why we're having conversations like this. This is 100 times better than a cable news segment. I mean, a cable news segment fucking sucks. You're going in there, you're on for 3 to 5 minutes, you're punching at each other and you leave, and no one gets humanized.
Yeah.
Right.
At the end of this, I don't know who could listen to this podcast. Well, I don't know who could listen to this podcast and see that Tom Arnold's humanized by it. I mean, he seems like a demon after all this. Like, wouldn't it be terrible to hang out with this guy? But obviously, I'm humanized by it. No, I'm kidding. But long form allows you to really get to know people. And I remember, I didn't used to be a fan of Pete Buttigieg. I didn't like it. I thought he was, a guy who was planning to be president from the day he was born. And then I listened to him on the Daily podcast, whatever this was, 2-3 years ago. And, it was 45 minutes or an hour with him. I got to the end of the podcast and I was like, oh my God, this is a wonderful guy. He was just a wonderful guy. Yeah. And long form does that. And we need more, not just more podcasts, but we need to actually have longer, real conversations with people and not just tweet our way into obscurity in our homes and alienate our communities.
Yeah. He communicates very well. Pete does. Yeah. He communicates very well. We need great communicators. I'm very proud of our governor out here, Gavin Newsom. I've always liked him and always supported him, but he is such a great communicator. I actually wish they could he could go in when they have the debate, if it's versus Trump, have him step in and debate. I saw about Hannity, and I do respect when people go on the other side if they're able to do their thing. Not like RFK Jr., who's just totally full of shit. But I mean, Gavin Newsom went out there on Hannity, and because he's bringing facts that these people have never heard before. And Jessica Tarlov, I don't know if you know her, Miles. She's on the 5. She's the liberal, but she's one of the best. I'm sure they're going to fire her soon because she is so eloquent, correcting the mistaken facts and stuff. And so, yeah, I appreciate it. It is cable, and they're messing with how to do it, and CNN's going through a whole bunch of different transformations, which I have sympathy for because they're trying to do new things. But I will say this: Nicole Wallace has been my wife every day. I look in her eyes for this whole thing. I got nobody around. I have no wife. I got 4 ex-wives. I'm single, but I look at her and just her disdain, just her and the men around her, the men in this country just screwing up, time of being weak, and just the look on her face as she is given the straight news, and I love her. And she's got a kid.
She worked for McCain, right?
I've got to share this. Nicole Wallace, I agree. I think she's the best person on television right now. Says it so straight. I adore her. She is fantastic. I'm actually going to see her next week, Tom. And hopefully by then I'll have a clip of this because I got to go sit down with her and play this clip. I mean, she is unbelievable. Really is.
She's so honest when she talks about Sarah Palin. And that whole thing.
I will say, you know what? I'll send you the separate clip, Miles. Maybe we get Tom number 5. You never know. There's still time, Tom.
Well, no, she's very happy married, but she has a kid that's my son's age. That you got to date somebody. I haven't had a date in 6 years. I'm not bragging, but you have to meet a person that has kids the same age, sort of, so you can have a play date while you're having your big person date. That just makes it easier. Getting play dates set up is hard. You do once you can do that, so. I'm not in any hurry, but this
was actually one of the purposes we got together with you today, Tom. This is actually a little bit of a romantic life intervention. Yeah. So I'm going to put this out there. If you've got good ideas for people who should date Tom, just DM me. I'm on Twitter at Miles Taylor USA. If you want to send me a DM with your recommendation, we'd love to set you up with Tom Arnold today.
Is your wife? Does she have a sister or a mother that's single?
One sister that is currently who is 22, Tom. So I think maybe we should stay away from that. She's a much younger.
Tom only wants to date resistance family members now. That's it. That's the part.
Well, I can't imagine dating somebody that's a Trump person. My last ex-wife, a couple of ex-wives are Trump people, and my last ex-wife in the divorce thing, she wrote that I had Trump derangement syndrome. And I remember the judge read that, and the judge goes, who wouldn't at this point? Like, she's trying to, at this point, who doesn't? And that was a very funny moment in court.
Tom is a Roseanne survivor, and he deserves our respect. Just that.
Different world.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys. I know we're out of time, Miles. I know you're going from one to another here. I want once again, first of all, everyone check out. Blowback. It's out now. Excellent book. The podcast, Whistleblowers. If you like what you hear about the whistleblowers and everything about this conversation, please check that out as well. Tom, he was just in episode of FUBAR with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
The strike is over. Right? Yeah. Pray for the end of our strike out here, and then I'll be back on FUBAR and the Rookie Feds on ABC. Get up the strike over. Until then, I'll be doing stand up near you.
There you go. And most importantly, I can't thank you guys enough, both of you. And you guys are always welcome back anytime. And I was hoping that you guys would get along, and it was exactly how I hoped.
You made a great match.
I just sat back and watched.
And this has gone very well.
Well, but I hated Tom's recommendation. When I published this thing, he said, print it this big. So if you go pick up a copy at your store, they're huge copies. So I'm so sorry about that. That was Tom's idea.
I will never forget the name. I just said before he came on, what's the name? I'm going to download it. And when they said Blowback, I go, okay, that's locked in. That's not a great name.
But I do have to say, Tom, you are a patriot. So grateful for you speaking out. And Rob and Lori, you guys have just, you facilitate the best conversations here on the World Wide Web. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you for watching The Whole. I am Rob Sprance.
And I'm Lori Levine.
Later, fucks.